You're listening to episode 29, chapter 3 of the Daily Growth Discipleship Podcast. I'm Josh Havens.
And I'm Chris Lamberth. And we're on a journey to learn what it means to live a lifestyle of discipleship. We're glad you're joining us and hope that as you set aside this time for God, that He would help you grow today in the everyday moments of life.
Today we're continuing our conversation with Tricia Rhodes about her book, Sacred Chaos: Spiritual Disciplines for the Life You Have. Tricia Rhodes specializes in helping others experience God's presence through practicing soul care. An adjunct professor for Fuller Theological Seminary and author of 7 books, including the acclaimed The Soul at Rest, she's a practiced minister with over 40 years of experience. With a rich background in Christian spirituality and a PhD in leadership studies, Tricia draws from a broad spectrum to create life-giving tools that can make anyone's spiritual journey relevant and meaningful.
Have you ever had a friend that was so spiritual that it made you sick? You know, the type that would pray about everything, even what they were supposed to eat for lunch. Well, while that might seem extreme to many of us, it demonstrates a desire that we all have. We want to develop such a close, intimate relationship with God that we would trust Him with even our mundane choices. We want to see the world through His eyes and so be led by His Spirit throughout the day. Well, Tricia tells us a story of a woman who had this sort of relationship with God. And she taught Tricia an important lesson that we can learn from to develop this sort of spiritual sight in our own lives.
You tell the story along this lines, too, of sort of developing this discipline of just being aware of God in the everyday moments of life, which I think is one of the most underserved disciplines. It's something we don't think about, but I think if we can develop this sense, I mean, again, we have the prayer, we have the Bible reading, sometimes we throw in journaling or fasting that we never do or whatever, but really, I think this walking with Jesus and developing that awareness of His presence is one of the most important things that we can do. You tell this awesome story about a woman, or you were talking with him about the woman that would pray about which clothes she would wear every day, or you asked her, which clothes do you pray about, which clothes you would wear? And she said, only if I need to.
Yeah.
Can you tell us that story and what that means?
So the woman, her name was Joy Dawson. She's still alive. She was one of the founding mothers of YWAM. So she has a rich heritage, but she was the first person that I really ever saw walk in this way, where they were constantly connecting with God in all the different things. And she would often just say, you know what, let's just pause right now and see if God has something to say to us. And it was just amazing. And so I couldn't figure it out. I thought, does she listen to God all the time? Is she always asking God? And so I asked her that question. I said, what do you ask God about? Do you even ask Him what you're supposed to wear? And she said, well, only if I need to. And at the time, it was hard for me to understand it, but I've come to understand that when you have this intimate connection with Jesus, you'll know there's times you need to check in with Him, and other times you just live out your life the way He created you to live it, and you have a freedom in that. So there are some times you might need to say, gee, Lord, is there anything you want to say to me about my clothing? It'd probably be the exception, but we want to live in that kind of sensitivity with Him.
That seems to me kind of like, so my wife and I, she handles most of the finances, just because that's how we did it. I don't know why. She's good at it.
She's probably better at it.
Anyway, I'm typically free to spend money on whatever I want or I need to. But sometimes I've got this check that says, you know what, I should probably just check in with Alicia and see what she thinks about spending money right now. So like Chris and I'll be going out to supper one night and like, should we go to this place where I can get a $10 meal, or should we go to a $5 meal instead? I just figure that's the time that I should check in. And sometimes that's actually paid off, because she says, well, we're actually a little bit tighter right now, so a $5 meal would be better.
Yes.
And it's just a sense that I've picked up having walked with her like that for 11 years now.
Right. And let me just, I love that. That's a perfect example, because often we have those little twinges in us. But again, we haven't trained ourselves to know that Jesus is right there walking with us. My husband often says, let's pray, because if Jesus were sitting in that chair right there, we would surely ask his opinion about this. And we've had this
That's a
long
great
discussion about what we should do. We said, if he was right here, wouldn't we ask him what he thought? So that's that kind of thing. Is a lot of times we have that sense of, and that's kind of the sacred chaos, is waking up to the reality that spirit, he lives in us. So he's always speaking if we could learn to hear him.
Yeah, man, that is so freeing. And that's really good. If he was sitting right there, we would ask him. Well, like reading that story was a real eye-opener, and it was something I could take it, I could meditate on, because that's a powerful thing, only if I need to. Because I've met people who've like that, and I'm sort of like, okay, well, that's a little too spiritual, I don't know, like if I want to pray about where I want to go out to eat, but it's like, only if you need to. And it's like, so anyway, it makes perfect sense to me, but it's still, it's a great proverb, I think, to chew on and to figure out where you are at in your relationship with Christ, and just say, look, are there things that you need to be asking him about more? Or maybe he's saying, enjoy. I've given you the freedom to choose today. So I think that's an important point. One of the other spiritual disciplines that you talked about in the book was spiritual sight. And this was one that I thought was so important as well. First, can you just explain what spiritual sight is?
Yeah, I think spiritual sight is how Jesus lived. He said, I do what I see the Father doing. So he was able to offer, and I'm one who believes he was always God, but he laid aside his reliance on his deity and learned to rely on the Spirit just the way we have to. And so he just saw things. He saw things in people. He saw something underneath what was going on, and so we're instructed to pray that we would have eyes to see. He often said that, if you only had eyes to see. So spiritual sight is just seeing what God is doing in the moment. It's seeing something that you might not have seen had you not been in that place of sensitivity to the Spirit.
Mm-hmm. And it's learning to walk with the Spirit and to hear from him, like we've been talking about. We've had a couple theologians on talk to us about spirit Christology. And so this idea, right, that Jesus had to live in the Spirit just as we did. And it's a challenging thought for a lot of people to kind of get over, to say, you're right. Well, but isn't he God? And it's like, well, but he laid it down. And if he's went through everything that we went through, then it's actually a really freeing thought to think that the same Spirit that empowered Jesus to do the things that he did,
that's right,
is available to empower us, and in this case, to give us that sight. How can we practice that, though, or develop this spiritual sight in ourselves? What are some of the things that you found effective in your own life, in particular?
Yeah, that's good. I think it begins by asking him to give us eyes to see. And then, I love the prayer of examine, which I often pray. It's twofold, is, Lord, where did I see you today? I'll pray this at the end of the day when I go to bed. Where did I see you working today? And then I'll say, where did I miss you? And often the Spirit will just show me there was that moment when I was giving someone counsel and I missed the Spirit's gentle nudge to just pray, with them. I just missed it, or to listen. And so I think having a practice where you really ask the Lord to help you and listen, whether you did or whether you didn't, that's one thing. The other thing is to really just try to expand. And it does take getting away from legalism, and it makes it more of an adventure, that everything that happens, he says all things are working together. So just having that belief that everything that happens to me today, I can, if God wants to show me something, I can see his hand in it. And it makes life an adventure, and it makes even the chaos and the hard times, there's a hopefulness about that.
Yeah, for sure. And so one of the things that I love about this idea of spiritual sight is that it's kind of like worldview lenses, or we all have a culture and the way in which we see the world. And in spiritual sight, it occurred to me, was like sort of a spiritual worldview. It's putting on the eyes of Jesus, and then it colors everything else in our reality. And if we can get that right, which again, I think there's might not be anything more difficult than this, is trying to
really hard
to see with the eyes of Jesus. And this truly does have to be bestowed upon us by the Spirit. We can't. Anyway, I asked that question about how we can practice it because I'm always curious as to how people do go about making that space. But I think another important point when we talk about any of these spiritual disciplines, and you can feel free to disagree with this, I guess, is that we don't do any of the growing. We simply just make that space, and then it's the Spirit who comes in us and can produce that fruit in us. And so spiritual sight seems to be one of those things that I don't know how you could be legalistic about it. Well, I mean, I guess you could fake the legalistic.
You could, you could go to such an extent that you're looking for the spiritual side of things in every little thing, and you do so at the expense of actually seeing what's going on around you.
Yes. Exactly.
Yeah, I think you can. I think I'm just thinking about this. There's almost like the counterpart of legalism is hyper spirituality. They kind of go hand in hand. So you're either going to end up in legalism, feeling like I didn't do it well enough, I should have worked harder at it, or hyper spirituality, where, like you said, you're trying to find it everywhere. That's not living in the Spirit. There is a gentleness about walking with the Lord, and it's just a gentle freedom that we have to, when we need to, listen and wait. But I also think, I tell a story in there that about when one of our sons at camp, I don't even remember why he did it, but he started, he got in trouble, and my husband was coming over to him, and he started running, and my husband's trying to go after him, and he's screaming at the top of his lungs, "He's trying to kill me! He's trying to kill me!" And, there's nothing more humiliating when you're a pastor than the whole church watching your son, scream like that. And when I wrote the chapter, I don't even remember what my point was, but it was interesting because my editor came back and she said, "Yeah, but I want to know what you learned about Jesus and his connection with you in that." And it was actually, that's why I say this book was a work in progress, because I was actually learning how to do what we're talking about right now. And so I went back and I thought, it's such a great example of some of my reactions to God, then when I just kind of throw up my hands, and all he is coming near because he loves me and he's going to show me something. And I'm like, and so that's a simple little example, but I've learned to see, whether I'm out gardening or whether I'm taking care of a grandchild, I've learned to say, maybe God has something in that for me. And it's kind of fun.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think this has a potential to almost become like a meta spiritual discipline. Again, once we can sort of learn to make that a habit, all these other sort of spiritual disciplines start to become not easy, but easier because you have those eyes, and you start to see, reading scripture is important because of X, Y, and Z, or yes, Jesus is right here with us, we should ask him what he thinks. Or, So anyway, it holds a lot of potential, and it's one that really challenged me, and I hope to practice it more intentionally. And so, yeah.
At Daily Growth Discipleship, our goal is to help you create a lifestyle of discipleship where you find ways to grow in the everyday moments of life. Spiritual sight is the ability to see what God is doing in the world around you in those everyday moments. And it's one of the most valuable skills for a lifestyle of discipleship you can practice and develop. One of the best ways to practice that is in the way you see the people around you. In her book, Sacred Chaos, Tricia ends her chapter on spiritual sight with this challenge. Try praying for others by asking God to give you spiritual sight regarding them. Instead of listing things you want for them or think they need, ask God how He sees them and what He desires for them. Take time to listen and jot down on a card the things you hear. Then make this your prayer plan for these people as you seek to see them through God's eyes.
How can you create a lifestyle of discipleship? Most Christians think discipleship is a program or a few practices thrown in at the beginning or end of the day. But we want to help you create a lifestyle where walking with Jesus throughout the day is not only possible, but natural. And we have a tool that's going to help you do just that. It's called the Daily Growth Journal. It's a guided journal that's going to help you become secure in your identity with God and authentically walk with Him in your daily life. Growing daily in your walk with Christ is possible if you cultivate a lifestyle of discipleship. And the Daily Growth Journal will help you do just that.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Daily Growth Discipleship Podcast. To find out more about Tricia and her work, check out soulatrest.com. Then check out the next chapter in our conversation, where Tricia talks about the value of experimenting with spiritual disciplines. If you want to stay up to date on everything happening at Daily Growth Discipleship, go to dailygrowthdiscipleship.com and subscribe for free. You can also subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify.